Hi, this is Marc Elias, founder of Democracy Docket. As most of you who are regular watchers of these videos know, there is no television host who I think does a better job on issues of democracy than Nicolle Wallace. I jump at every opportunity I have to be on her show, and this was no exception. I got to talk to her about the Epstein files and whether or not this is a short-term liability of the Republican Party or a long-term liability of the Republican Party. Here's the deal. Republicans are going to try to stretch this out because they don't have a solution now, right? They're all going to come back from Congress. And if there was a way that they could sort of lance this boil all at once, boy, would they love to do that. But there isn't any way to do it because they're going to get forced to vote on whether to release the Epstein files. The House committee has already voted to subpoena them from the Department of Justice, and the first batch are arriving. So there's no way that they are going to be able to stop there from being at least some release of the Epstein files. What I point out is that what they're going to do is strategically decide what files to put out in what order. So I promise you, the very first files that come out will not mention the name Donald Trump at all. Probably the next files that come out will not mention Donald Trump at all. Those are going to be the files that the Department of Justice does not turn over to the House, or at least does not turn them over easily. Those are going to be the files that even if Comer gets his hands on, the Republican chair of the committee, he's not going to want to put out. So expect there to be this jiu-jitsu political moment in which Republicans are claiming they're putting out the Epstein files. Democrats are pointing out they're not putting out all the Epstein files. And as Nicolle points out, this will be a short-term maneuver on the part of Republicans that will actually only extend the pain. Because the longer we are talking, the longer they are looking like they are hiding the Epstein files, the worse it is for them politically, and particularly in these House races, where you have all of these Republican House members who have previously gone on record saying the Epstein files need to come out. On top of that, we then talked about the Manosphere, and I was the only male on the panel, so I got to be the resident expert on the Manosphere and masculinity. And, I made a point that I've made before, which is it's not very masculine to not be willing to walk outside on the streets of Washington, D.C. I mean, I walk on the streets of Washington, D.C. all the time. And the fact that J.D. Vance, with all the, Secret Service, seems to be petrified to walk out of Union Station. The fact that Pete Hegseth, who's constantly, engaged in some kind of push-up or pull-up competition, seems afraid of Washington, D.C. The FBI director, is afraid of the streets of Washington, D.C. I don't know what's going on with them. These are the most petrified, least tough men if they don't think they can walk up and down the streets of Washington, D.C., which people like me do every single day. But they're alienating. These podcast hosts like Joe Rogan, who don't understand why the Epstein files haven't been released, don't understand why the immigration enforcement that they thought was going after criminals are actually going after, moped drivers and migrants who are not doing anything wrong. And so, I think the politics of the Epstein files combined with what I think is just a fundamental misreading, a fundamental weakness that they are showing around the way in which they are handling the migrant situation, as well as Washington, D.C. and other cities, I think is setting them up for a really bad fall from a political standpoint. It is a calamity for democracy. It is a tragedy for the people caught up in this. But from a purely political standpoint, Republicans are just not on the right page. They got off of their game plan around the Epstein files, and they really have never regained their footing. They continue to be off balance, and I suspect that's going to continue when they come back into town. Finally, we talked about a topic that I feel really passionately about, and you'll see that. So please make sure you watch the clips. Make sure you watch to the end of this video, because you'll see I had a lot to say about Fox News and the way in which they behaved in the aftermath of the 2020 election, and the revelations that we are now seeing in some of the text messages that are coming out as part of the defamation litigation they are involved in. So I'm not going to spoil that. I want you to watch that in the clips. Then I'm going to come back and we're going to discuss it a little bit further. But before we go to the clips, do me a favor right now, click the button in front of you that says subscribe to this video. If you like this video, also hit the share button and share this on your social media feed or with others. But also, perhaps most importantly, Leave me a comment. Let me know what you think about these videos, if there are topics you'd like us to cover. You know, Democracy Docket, we're doing a lot of expansion of our video offerings, particularly on YouTube. So always leave us a comment, and also to subscribe to Democracy Docket, click on the links below. But I'm going to go to those clips, and then I'll come back with a little bit more.
When you have the ostensible leader of that cultural adjacent movement saying we can, quote, change who we vote for next time, and explaining the nature of a child sex trafficking ring on the air, which was, you've got Ghislaine Maxwell in prison, but there are people she trafficked too, making the very logical point that to be imprisoned for felony child sex trafficking, and I think there are 4 other convictions, conspiracy to commit child sex trafficking and whatnot, you had to have been trafficking children for sex, 2 people. And so his point is simple, and not really one to be argued with, because she wouldn't be sitting in prison if she hadn't trafficked girls for sex, 2 people. So where do you think this political crisis for Donald Trump stands today?
So I think that it stands in a hiatus until Congress returns, and then there will be a critical pivot point, as you suggest. The fact is that the Republicans in the House almost certainly are going to have to vote on whether to release the Epstein files. Now, the jiu-jitsu that's starting to play out, you can just already see it, is that the Justice Department is going to selectively send some records to the House committee. Comer is then going to selectively release only some of those records. And I promise you, none of them will include the name Donald Trump. And so they will preemptively say, look, we did the thing that we said we were going to do. Democrats will call it out and say that is not true. And then the question is, where does the politics fall? Does the Trump coalition just say, okay, that's good enough? Or, as I suspect is the case, they say, no, we actually really want all the Epstein files. Like, we didn't come this far to just have some of them. And that's where I just think, like, they have misread the politics of this all along. People may not understand all the nuance of policy. They may not really understand how Medicaid cuts affect them this year versus next year. They may not understand who is telling the truth and not telling the truth about tax cuts. They understand what it means that there was a child sex trafficker in the name of Jeffrey Epstein, that Donald Trump's campaign promised to release those files, that Donald Trump has a reason, some really good reason personal to him, that he doesn't want them released, and that the Republican Party is doing his bidding. That's not a complicated story for people. And so I think ultimately the politics cut in favor of these files having to be released. But I think the question is going to be the way in which the Department of Justice slow walks or selectively releases.
We're also post January 20th, 2025, where we already know from Trump officials that hundreds of FBI agents were diverted to scrub the files. And we know from the Trump era that Trump's name is in it a whole bunch of times. No one can unknow that fact either.
Absolutely. And I think you're, by the way, exactly right about this culture. You know, not that I am a big peruser of the Manosphere, but as the resident man on this panel, you know, it is also the case that, you know, J.D. Vance acts like he is afraid to walk outside Union Station. I mean, there is something very alpha male about a lot of the things they're doing right now. The protecting the Epstein files, the ripping, you know, people off of mopeds and grabbing them and tackling them with 9 or 10 people. Frankly, the chasing down a guy who threw a sandwich. I suspect most of the Manosphere thinks the guy who threw the sandwich was hilarious. And the idea that the White House made this big video of it is quite, you know, non-masculine. And then, like I said, the whole way they are treating Washington, D.C. I mean, I walk down the streets of Washington, D.C. every day and, you know, don't have Secret Service surrounding me. So there is something, I think, that Donald Trump's administration has lost the plot over around this. And Republicans know it. And they know that they are in political trouble on this issue. And I suspect that they also know they're in political trouble on the broader set of masculine issues. I mean, the whole reason why the National Guard is in Washington, D.C. is because some dweeby teenage kid named Big Balls got beat up. And like the Manosphere knows that too. So I do think the Epstein thing's not going away. I do think that the Trump administration is mishandling this across a lot of vectors. And I think that Republicans in the House in particular are going to need to figure out some exit strategy.
We're back with Marc, Mary, and Michelle. Marc, just take us through what's legally significant about all of the willingness to, it sounds like, be part of a political effort that they knew wasn't rooted in fact.
Yeah, so it's legally significant for the defamation case because it goes to state of mind, right? The Fox News defense is going to be effectively, we didn't know, fog of war, we were just reporting what people were saying to us, and we did not intend or in any way know that we were airing false accusations. And what all of this goes to is putting that to show that it's not true, right? That the fact is that here is Bret Baier, a day after the election saying, look, we're putting stuff on the air that's not true, it's crap. And then a month later, after even more crap is put on, another host is saying, imagine if we went all in on the Stop the Steal, right? So it goes to state of mind. The fact that Jeanine Pirro is saying, even before the election, I am doing all this stuff to help the president, I'm doing all this stuff to help the Republican Party, goes to, again, the sense that what they were doing here was not honest reporting, but rather was they knew that they were spreading false information. But Nicolle, I want to add one other thing. As the lawyer who led the effort to defeat those 60 plus lawsuits, history would have been different. We are right now facing a president who has threatened an executive order to ban mail-in voting. We have a president who, in that same social media post, said that he believes states need to act at his direction as his agents in how ballots are counted. That's not Vladimir Putin talking, that's Joseph Stalin talking. And imagine how things would have been different if Fox News had come out and said, you know what, he lost. President lost, and just gave no quarter to the big lie, gave no platform for Rudy Giuliani or Sidney Powell, gave no platform, frankly, for Pam Bondi, who was an election denier who badmouthed the election during the same time period. How would things be different today, even if Donald Trump had won again? He would not have the currency of the big lie. He would not have an administration stocked from top to bottom with election deniers who have been, and he would not have a base that has been fed these lies over and over again. So, to the folks at Fox News, yeah, they'll probably have to settle this case because they've had to settle the other and the facts are against them. But shame on them. Shame on them for what they did to their audience. Shame on what they've done to the American public. And frankly, shame on them for what they have done to American democracy.
Well, we don't have to wonder alone. Let me read you Tucker Carlson's alternate history. Marc, this is from the New York Times on Tucker Carlson's text messages after the election where Trump lost. Carlson texts with members of his staff 2 months after the 2020 election and 2 days before the insurrection at the Capitol building about looking forward to not having to cover Trump. Tucker Carlson, quote, "We are very, very close to being able to ignore Trump most nights. I truly can't wait." Tucker Carlson, quote, "I hate him passionately." Also from Tucker Carlson, after the riot at the Capitol on January 6th, Tucker Carlson texts with Mr. Pfeiffer about Trump's culpability in the insurrection and how to deal with viewers who still support him. It was 2 weeks before the inauguration of President Biden. Tucker Carlson, quote, "Trump has 2 weeks left. Once he's out, he becomes incalculably less powerful, even in the minds of his supporters." Tucker Carlson, quote, "He's a demonic force, a destroyer, but he's not going to destroy us. I've been thinking about this every day for 4 years." We started, Marc Elias, talking about the manosphere. There's nothing more emasculating than having to lie down with your, quote, destroyer and, quote, demonic force.
Yeah, I loved the way you began this hour in your reference to Lindsey Graham, right? As the ultimate in obsequious personalities. Here is someone who was once viewed as an independent, someone who's viewed as having his own personal brand along with John McCain, and he has forfeited all of that and now is a punchline to what it means to have forfeited all your dignity and self-respect. And that now goes for Tucker Carlson. It goes for all the House Republicans and all the senators. It goes for Marco Rubio, who, little Marco has never looked so small as he looks right now. With each additional government position he takes on, he gets tinier and tinier. It's true for the countless number of Republican officials who privately said that Donald Trump was a joke and now have to suck up to him. It's true for the business leaders and the big law firm leaders who have diminished themselves as they have bent a knee and they will never stand tall again. So it's a tragedy for Fox News. It's a tragedy for American democracy. It's a tragedy for the broader society. But the one thing that those of us who stand up against him every day will be able to say is that when others were bowing down and diminishing themselves, we were willing to tell the truth. All right. So that was me talking to Nicolle Wallace. I was on for almost 40 minutes. So those were just some of the highlights of this appearance. And it's really, like I said, one of the real pleasures talking to her is that there's no formula to her. Like, she can say, or a producer can say, Mark, can you come on and talk for 10 minutes? And then the conversation just leads in different directions. And the next thing you know, you're there for 40 minutes. So again, I highly recommend her show. If you're looking to be caught up to news on democracy issues. Also, I highly recommend Democracy Docket. Again, the links to subscribe to its newsletters are above or in the description below. But I teased before we went in about the last part of what I had to talk about. And, as I said, just imagine how different history would be if right now the currency within the Trump administration was not the big lie about 2020. What would it have looked like if Fox News had told the truth? What would it have looked like if those Fox News hosts had said every night, Donald Trump lost the election? Donald Trump has lost the election. Donald Trump has lost the election. What if they had not platformed people like Rudy Giuliani to tell preposterous lies, or Sidney Powell to say things that were utterly, utterly wrong, false, and misleading? How different would it have been if those 65 lawsuits that he brought, when he lost 64 of them, and I'm proud of the work that my team did in handing him and his allies those defeats. But how different would it have been if Fox News had reported on those cases, the allegations that were being made, and how the judges of both parties, judges appointed by Democrats and Republicans, elected judges, elected as Democrats or Republicans, state courts, federal courts, trial courts, appellate courts, how different the moment would be right now for democracy, even if Donald Trump was in office again. But if the big lie, if election denialism was not sweeping the country, right now we have an existential crisis facing our country in that Donald Trump wants to issue another executive order to try to take over our elections, to do away with mail-in voting. How different things would have been if Fox News had not gone along with these lies. How different it would be right now if Donald Trump, who is meeting with Vladimir Putin and then taking a page out of Joseph Stalin's playbook, saying that he wants to be in charge of how votes are tabulated and counted. I mean, how different things would be right now if Fox News had just put democracy and telling the truth to its audience above the short-term gain that it might have made in a few extra advertising dollars. What they did, and I said this in the video and I meant it, what they did was a disservice and a shame, not just for their network, not just for their viewers, but for the truth, for the rule of law, and for democracy itself. And look, that's part of why I created Democracy Docket in 2020, in the run-up to the election. In March of 2020, I started Democracy Docket. And at that point, everybody told me that I was crazy to think that there was going to be a problem, that Donald Trump's lies would accelerate, that we would have anything other than a smooth election. And I insisted that I was going to start this news outlet to tell the truth about what is happening to democracy and what's happening in the courts. And we were not going to be beholden to any corporate interest. We were not going to be beholden to, private equity investors or venture capitalists or mega corporations or legacy media. We were just going to tell the truth. And here we are 5 years later, and Democracy Docket has grown beyond my wildest expectation. It now has 20 full-time employees who help bring you accurate information about what is happening to democracy and what's happening in court. And so please, do me a favor, help support their efforts by becoming a Democracy Docket subscriber or premium member today by clicking the link above or in the description below. And also, as I said, make sure you like this video and you press the subscribe button so that you get more of this content in the future. I'll see you next time.